The iron door slams shut behind you. Your wrists are chained, your ankles raw where the shackles have rubbed skin into open wounds. You are dragged forward by guards stumbling onto the sand. Then you hear it, the roar of 50,000 voices rising above you. The Colosseum. The sun blinds your eyes. The crowd stares down, a sea of faces, hungry not for bread, but for blood. You are not here for justice. You are here for entertainment. A trumpet blares. The crowd surges to its feet. Behind the gates, you hear the snarls of animals, lions, leopards, bears, starved for days, driven into frenzy. You understand now. You are not a man anymore. You are a lesson, a warning, a sacrifice. Because in Rome, punishment was never just punishment. It was theater. It was humiliation. It was fear, hammered into the bones of every citizen, every slave, every rebel who dared to imagine Rome could be defied. And for you, as for so many, it will end in pain beyond imagining. Rome was an empire built on power, and power required fear. Laws existed not only to protect the innocent, but to terrify the guilty, to remind every man, woman, and child of who truly ruled. For slaves, foreigners, and rebels, Rome's punishments were deliberately cruel. The harsher the spectacle, the deeper the message. This is what happens if you defy the empire. Executions were not private matters, they were public theater. A crucifixion was not hidden away, but carried out on the roads where all could see. Arena executions were scheduled entertainment, woven into the rhythm of Roman life. Tortures and mutilations were not whispered about, but displayed. Rome did not punish to reform. Rome punished to dominate. Not all were treated equally. Slaves bore the most brutal punishments. A runaway slave could be branded on the forehead with the letter F, fugitivus. A rebellious slave could be crucified, burned alive, or torn apart in the arena. To Rome, they were property, not people. To betray Rome was to invite not just death, but agony, crafted to send fear through whole provinces. Ordinary criminals, thieves, deserters, bandits, often died in public spectacle. Citizens, especially of rank, were spared the most degrading punishments, but even nobles could not escape humiliation if they fell from power. Rome's justice was a ladder. The higher you stood, the less cruel your fall. But for the vast majority, the bottom rungs meant only torment. Two places defined Rome's theater of punishment. In the Forum, the heart of political life, men were judged, flogged, or humiliated. To be beaten or executed there was to be erased before the eyes of the city. But the amphitheater, above all the Colosseum, was where Rome's punishments became legend. There, at midday, when the crowd grew restless between gladiatorial bouts, the condemned were thrown out to die. They were not expected to fight. They were expected to be destroyed. Beasts tore them apart. Flames consumed them. Mock battles turned them into props for mythological reenactments. The crowd cheered not for guilt or innocence, but for the spectacle of pain. Each punishment carried a message. Crucifixion told the world, this is what happens to rebels and slaves. Damnatio ad bestias told the mob crime is meat for beasts, and Rome feeds it gladly. Torture of slaves told masters fear controls better than trust. The forced suicides of nobles told senators power is Rome's to give and take, even from you. The brutality was deliberate. Rome was not ashamed of it, it gloried in it.
Act 2. Crucifixion and damnatio ad bestias. The cross, Rome's tool of terror. Of all Rome's punishments, none carried greater infamy than crucifixion. It was not just a method of killing, it was a statement carved in agony across the sky. To be crucified was to die slowly, publicly, and with every shred of dignity stripped away. The condemned were scourged first, their backs shredded by whips, studded with bone and metal. Flesh hung loose, ribs exposed, muscles torn. Many collapsed before even reaching the place of execution. But Rome did not care. The suffering was the point. Then came the crossbeam. Prisoners carried it through the streets, stumbling under its weight, jeered at by crowds. The procession itself was humiliation. Neighbors, strangers, children watching as the condemned dragged their own instruments of death. At the sight, the cross awaited. Prisoners were stripped naked, thrown down onto wood. Nails were driven through wrists and ankles, or ropes used to bind the limbs so tightly circulation failed. Then the cross was lifted upright, dropped into its hole with a shudder that tore wounds open afresh. And there they hung, hours stretched into days. The condemned gasped for air, pushing up on nailed feet to breathe, then collapsing again in agony. Death came by exhaustion, suffocation, shock. Slowly, inevitably. This was Rome's warning: defy us, and you will die not as a man, but as a display. Roman citizens were rarely crucified. It was considered too degrading for those with rights. Instead, citizens condemned to death were beheaded, a cleaner end. But for foreigners, slaves, rebels, there was no mercy. Crucifixion was the empire's declaration that they were less than human. The most famous crucifixion in history, Jesus of Nazareth, was not unique. He was one of thousands who died on Roman crosses, their names forgotten, their bones scattered. The cross was not an exception. It was Rome's everyday instrument of fear. If the cross was too slow and the beasts too theatrical, Rome had fire. Burning alive was a punishment reserved for the most despised. Slaves who murdered their masters, traitors, arsonists. They were tied to stakes, oil poured over them, and torches thrust into their bodies. The flames licked up robes and flesh alike. Skin blistered, curled, blackened. Victims screamed until their lungs collapsed into silence. And still the crowd cheered. For Rome, fire was purification, a body made into ash, a soul made into an example. The other fate was the hook. Some condemned were strangled or beaten first. Then their corpses were dragged through the streets on iron hooks, jeered at, spat at, humiliated even in death. Others were impaled alive, bodies raised above the mob, twitching until life fled. It was not enough to kill. Rome needed to desecrate, to show that even memory could be mutilated. Torture was not confined to execution. It was part of interrogation. Slaves, especially, could not testify without torture. Roman law declared their words worthless unless wrung out by pain. And so they were scourged, beaten with rods, torn with hooks, burned with irons until they confessed, whether truth or lie. A runaway slave might survive, but only to be branded. The letter F, fugitivus, burned into the forehead, a scar that never faded. For the rest of their lives, they carried Rome's mark of shame, a walking warning to others. Rome prided itself on sparing citizens the degradation of the cross or the beasts. But citizenship did not mean safety. The most merciful fate was beheading. Swift, clean, final, but still public, still humiliating. For nobles and senators who fell out of favor, there was often another path: forced suicide. A blade presented, a poison offered, the emperor's command unspoken but absolute. It was said nobles took their lives calmly, opening their veins into bowls while dining, as if the manner of their death could preserve some shred of dignity. But make no mistake, even this was punishment, a reminder that Rome's highest men still bent to Rome's will. At times, punishments were shaped not by law, but by the whim of emperors. Nero, in his cruelty, turned executions into festivals. Christians were tied to poles, smeared with pitch, and set ablaze as living torches to light his gardens at night. The emperor dined as their bodies burned, laughing as screams filled the air. Commodus, obsessed with the arena, ordered executions staged as entertainment. Men dressed as mythological villains were slaughtered, their deaths scripted to flatter the emperor's vanity. Rome's justice was never blind. It was political, theatrical, and merciless. Rome called itself eternal. It called itself civilized. It called itself the light of the world. But beneath the marble, beneath the rhetoric of law and order, Rome ruled through fear. Fear nailed to crosses along its roads. Fear bleeding into the sand of its arenas. Fear branded into the skin of slaves. Fear etched into the silence of erased names. And it worked. For centuries, men obeyed not because Rome was merciful, but because Rome was merciless. Yet, in its brutality, Rome revealed something darker. Civilization and cruelty can walk hand in hand. Order can be built on screams. Peace can be written in blood. The empire that gave the world law, architecture, and empire also gave it the cross, the beasts, the fire, the hook. Rome's greatness was forged not just in marble and steel, but in the brutal punishments that kept its world in fear.